Gian DeLeon, and this is K11 Konversations, a podcast where we discuss the intersections between creativity, culture, and innovation in line with K11's social mission to incubate talent and propagate culture. On today's episode, I'm speaking with stylist, director, and entrepreneur Beth Birkett. Beth's worn a lot of hats during her decades-long career in street culture. She's worked in music at Def Jam, styled for fellow directors like Khalil Joseph, and is also the co-owner of UNION, the New York-born boutique that now has outposts in Los Angeles and Tokyo. Last year, she founded Befi's Beauty Supply. It's a lifestyle label influenced by the beauty salon culture in the Black community and a marketplace that empowers entrepreneurs from underrepresented communities, especially women of color. Beth and I discuss how she got her start, the importance of fostering community, and her longtime relationships with artists like Arthur Jaffa, Karan Davis, and photographer Shaniqua Jarvis. Here's Beth. So Beth, thank you so much for taking some time to get on the podcast. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Very honored. This is amazing. Thank you for having me.
The honor's mine, really. So for people who might be unfamiliar with your career trajectory, of course, you're definitely a hardcore New York native. A lot of people don't know you got your start at another New York institution, which was Hot 97.
Yeah, wow. Yeah, you did your research. I don't even know how you would know that.
That's a deep cut, but I think people really have to know that, you know, when people say somebody has been quote unquote in it, right? What does that mean? And to make this transition from, of course, radio, especially hip hop radio, which is, of course, a male-dominated world, which we'll talk about that. I think it helps inform, to me, a lot of the parallels of being a woman in predominantly male industries that had a sort of, you know, environment that was a bit misogynistic. And part of your career has been sort of creating spaces in places where, as a woman, it must have been really hard to sort of make a path, I feel like.
Yes. So I actually started in radio because my aunt, who I always looked up to as a little girl, she worked for the UN, but in radio. And I'm part Jamaican and she's Jamaican. So she did the radio for Jamaica. And I remember really wanting to work with her. And for whatever reason, it just didn't end up happening. But in that, just always looking up to my aunt, I started pursuing other channels like Hot 97. And it was just kind of the luck of the draw. I think I filled out an application and got an internship. And yeah, I worked there for, probably like a year in probably 96? DJ Red Alert was there. I worked with Molly Shannon and occasionally Skeletor, who worked with Wendy Williams, who was there at the time. She wasn't super nice to me, but you know, but yeah, it was interesting. And I learned a lot from radio. Vinnie Brown, shout out to him. And then when the radio changed from Kiss FM to Hot 97 and everybody was going to either Hot 97 or WBLS, that's when I started transitioning out of it. Mm-hmm. And I was in school as well. So I actually started at BMCC and then I applied to Parsons New School.
What didn't you like about radio that made you want to consider something else? And then how did you end up at Def Jam as well?
From radio, it just felt like it was a hustle. I just realized it wasn't for me. Like I didn't have the personality, like your personality just had to stand out. I was too young at that point. I wanted to explore other things. So I worked in the music industry and I started working at Uptown Records. And so I kind of had a lot of internships. Mm-hmm. So I was just open. I was like, I want to, experience it all. So I worked at Uptown for Andre Harrell and Sybil Penix, who was a stylist and assistant to Puffy. A lot of people hadn't even heard of her, but because she was Puffy's assistant, she had pretty much done all the styling, even though Puffy would take credit for it. Everyone from Jodeci, Mary J. Blige, Total. So I don't know. I just kind of tried everything. And I really loved working in the music industry. It just felt like the most authentic. The people were just real. there were just so many amazing people that I met from the music industry. And it wasn't even that, because it was tough. You know, it was super competitive, just being in the style world. But I also worked in fashion. I worked for Marabella magazine and Elle magazine, just interning. And it just wasn't the same as being in music. It was not as organized, but that was kind of awesome because I was able to do whatever, you know, whether it was delivering something or being in a meeting that typically I wouldn't be allowed to be in, but it was just kind of like a crapshoot. And everyone treated me like family, like it was like a real family. So I really liked that part, even though they called me Callie and they were like, you know, you're too nice and you smile too much. And
Wait, they called you Callie even though you weren't from Cali at that time, or?
No, I was. I had come from California and I was just really different. Like going to high school in California, I was basically in the suburbs. So I listened to rock music. I listened to all kinds of music, which, you know, New York and the music industry was, as much as it was free, it was also very like segregated. It was like, oh, you're Black, so you do Black things. And I was always different. And people saw that. Even though, you know, I worked with Russell Simmons, who was very different and diverse, and, you know, Lear Cohen and Fred Jordan and Rhonda Cowan, all these amazing people, I was still really different.
Yeah. Obviously, now you're a co-owner at Union, and people might not know that you introduced your husband, Chris, to a lot of the people that he knows now. And eventually, you know, you guys bought the store from those owners. But the Stussy Supreme connection, you know, my understanding is that that came from you originally.
Yes, it did. I worked at Fat Farm, and I also became really good friends with Bianca Gebbia. And so I started working at Stussy as well. And, you know, for James, and James was still like working in Stussy at the time. It was before, you know.
For people who don't know, you know, he co-founded Union actually with Marianne Fusco, another woman in streetwear who doesn't get her roses nearly enough, I feel like.
Thank you, Eugene. Yes, Marianne Fusco pretty much ran Union. And so when I was kind of transitioning from leaving Stussy because I was working for Russell Simmons pretty much full time and I was still in school, I introduced Chris to James Gebbia. And so he basically was like, oh, you should do Union. But me and Chris, we weren't together when he first started working at Union.
Right.
I was like really in the music industry at this point.
I mean, I'm sure that there's a whole other thread down there because everyone sort of talks about, when they talk about the quote unquote history of streetwear and where we are now, they talk about that class of Stussy, Union, early Supreme, like Eddie Cruz, mostly men, right? When there was a really big contingent of women from that scene as well. You know, there's the X-Large and X-Girl too, that whole story, but there's that whole part that, you know, people don't really know a lot about or don't talk about as much. So can you shed a little bit of light on, you know, the women involved in the scene who are really integral into making it what it is today?
Well, definitely. I mean, the clubhouse with Camilla, the owner of 555 Soul, was really interesting because I had known Camilla for a long time, but still learned so much on the clubhouse.
And this is Camilla Elk for people who are unfamiliar.
Yes.
Right.
Sorry. Because at that time, you know, like the whole downtown scene, like Lisa Cooper was probably one of the first people I met who was a fashion stylist at the time, but she was part of that whole like art, Futura, Keith Haring crew. And she was a Black woman and one of the Black women I really looked up to. But we were all like doing different things, but we didn't necessarily know what we were doing. We just kind of all hung out, all kind of went to the same clubs. And downtown was so specific. So someone like a Camilla from 555 Soul, who owned one of the first streetwear shops, and Marianne Fusco, like it wasn't really a thing. So, you know, the whole like, well, who started streetwear is kind of unknown because it was just this natural, organic melting pot of people from the music industry, artists, graffiti artists, fashion. Everybody was just really just enjoying life and then hustling and making sure they could pay rent every month, you know?
Yeah.
And so there wasn't really a title. And honestly, the reason why we're even talking about like what's considered streetwear or not is really because of Supreme, because of the success of Supreme. Everybody wants to stake a claim in, what is now considered streetwear. But then it was like, it was a bad word. Nobody wanted to be considered streetwear. Everybody wanted to be like fashion, or even though it was all inspired by music, by skateboarding, by surfing, by hip hop, a lot of Black culture. And that's all street culture. And it's diverse. It's not white. It's not suburban. It's just a melting pot of just different people and their different cultures that are coming together just to have fun.
To your point, I feel like plenty of times the media can pigeonhole female creatives and artists and athletes to just this woman is X, right? And I feel like that term multi-hyphenate creative has been applied more to men who have been doing more things. Whereas, looking at your career and hearing you talk about how you were figuring things out and that vibe of just, we were just kind of trying to see what works. How would you compare your experience as a woman creative before, like when you were coming up, to how it is now? Do you think it's become more inclusive? Or do you think the idea of having to juggle multiple expectations and multiple identities is almost second nature growing up in a patriarchal society where you have to sort of balance different perceptions at any given time?
Well, I think it's always been a challenge, being a woman, being a Black woman. And that's why I'm so vocal about this now. Literally created a brand out of being a Black woman, because it has been a struggle to be a Black woman creative, a woman creative. Whenever you are put in these positions, people either assume you're there because you're Black and you're like a token, we needed to fill a quota, which has been a thing for me. A lot of the opportunities I had were because I was Black, because I was a woman, because I was a different type of Black woman, but never given the title as creative. They would be like, oh, you're just different, or you're out the box, or, like Andre Harrell was like, you were the first hipster I ever met. But it was because no one could put me or people like me in a box. But you gravitate towards those people. So along the way, like I became really cool with Pharrell and the Neptunes, and, you were all alike. And somehow that becomes your community. And it's hard because women don't even realize that you are creating these situations or these events as a woman, because you don't know until someone gives you the title. So it's hard for you to take credit or to be like, oh yeah, I put that person on, or I did that, or you know what I mean? Because no one is going to tell you. And as a woman, you're taught to be graceful and to be humble. And unless someone gives you the title, you don't really take it. I've learned, just take it.
Right.
Just take it, because no one's going to give it to you as a woman. No one's going to be like, this woman did this. And it's hard in the creative world to really put a stamp on it, because it always is a collective, right? It is a group of people. It's never one person that starts a trend or starts a following like a streetwear, or, you know what I mean?
Right.
It's groups of people.
Now, speaking of creating spaces and empowering, underserved communities, we'll get to Befi's Beauty Supply, the label you launched last year. But I also want to talk about the Underground Museum in Los Angeles and a lot of the artists you've also helped empower and bring awareness around in your work for Union and beyond. Karan Davis, Anya Wu, and Khalil Joseph. You've worked with Khalil Joseph in the past as a stylist for a Flying Lotus video. How did these relationships form, and how do you find these artists, and also young artists like Delphin Finley, whom you've also given a platform via Union? What's your process in meeting these different people and figuring out, hey, let's do something? I
actually met Khalil first, and I met him from Anoma Whitaker.
The former Complex fashion editor.
Yes. I knew her from New York, Chris and I. And she introduced us to Khalil, and Khalil was so young. He was always an old soul. Like, he would hang with Chris and I and the kids. So we started this collective. It was me, Khalil, Omid Fatimi, Paul Chang. It was a bunch of us, and we had a collective called What Matters Most. It wasn't a collective I started. It was started by Khalil Omid and Paul Chang, and I just became a part of it because I basically came to LA because I wanted to be a director. We would all help each other in different ways. I, by default, was the stylist, just always handled the clothes.
You have a whole Vimeo archive of the Pollen music video. There's all the Union videos you also shot. Like recently there was that Jordan campaign that you directed too, right?
Yes. Like I'm always shooting a video. It's something I love. So being a part of that crew is really awesome. And of course we would use Solomon, my son, was in the video. It was just all about community, which those are pretty much all the jobs I've ever had have been like my little community, my little family. And we just hustled and did whatever it took to like make things happen and brought each other up. So Khalil and then Noah Davis, obviously the painter, and my brother as well. That's how I met Karan Davis. She was a filmmaker. We're all like have similar souls and then just the struggle being women, being mothers, having to juggle both. We just always have been very supportive of each other.
When old institutions fail to recognize, new movements and the importance of what's relevant, then, how do you know when it's time to sort of create your own space to highlight and bring awareness to these things that people should have more eyes on, but aren't getting the support they need from sort of the old guard?
I actually learned a lot from Noah Davis, from Khalil Joseph, from Karan Davis, when they started the Underground Museum. We were good friends with Khalil, Karan, Noah, and we all had kids. We had young kids at that time. And we were looking for just like a studio space, that we could have a backyard and Noah could work on his paintings and, we could do some stuff with Union. And Noah found the strip, which is now called the Underground Museum. And it was just like these 3 retail spaces. Mm-hmm. And he had this vision to just knock down all the walls and make them one. And it created this huge backyard, which was the thing. We were like, we have kids and we live in LA. Like, how could we not have this open back space? To see what he and Karan have built is really, really amazing and inspired me for sure. It's all these individuals and just seeing people being able to triumph when people didn't believe in them and then they blow up. It's really been a huge inspiration for me. And it's why my whole thing is to help other artists, entrepreneurs, just people come up, because that's what it's really all about. That is the innovation. That is the future.
And what a segue into Befi's Beauty Supply, which I feel like it is a culmination of, a lot of the things that you've learned along the way from, building a lifestyle brand and then also using that as a platform to elevate, other people that you've been friends with for a while and new talent as well. The lookbook that you guys released just now was shot by Clifford Prince King and features a lot of the people we've just talked about, along with other artists and friends of the brand, right? There's Maurice Harris in there, Lorenzo Diggins Jr., Richard Brooks, I think, also did some photography for it too.
Yes, he did. He took all the photos. He works with us, so that's our fam. So basically, the whole inspiration behind that was, here we have this amazing opportunity to create this collection with our collaborators, and it's COVID. It's pandemic. Right. And it's like, what do we do? How do we tell this story? And I remember being very stressed about it, not knowing what to do, but always leaning in towards my family, my community, which is basically the whole inspiration behind Befi's Beauty Supply. So we found Clifford Prince's work. The photos were very intimate and just beautiful. And it just reminded me of what we're going through now. It's just like family, your loved ones, people that you're closest to. And so we reached out to Clifford Prince King and he told us he was available, and he's amazing. I really, really loved working with him. He's a young fine art photographer. He just has such a great energy and vibe, and he just gives great direction. And it's crazy, but there's not a lot of photographers that give great direction outside of Shaniqua Jarvis and Clifford, basically. And it was great because he just captured the moment. And then I decided to use all my friends because I'm like, we have our quarantine crew. And I wanted to just really capture what was happening now. We're in our houses, we're in our spaces. So I basically just asked all my friends and they were like, yeah. And, again, that sense of community, they're just like, whatever you need, Beth, we're down to help.
I think hands down my favorite image that I've seen so far, it's Arthur Jaffa in a sarong, which is like powerful and amazing too, just for people who are fans of both. Can you tell me a bit about your relationship with him and how you guys met? It was in 2018 when he won the Golden Lion at the Venice Biennale for the White Album. You got a shout out. How did that feel? And what was the whole thing leading up to that?
I'm so happy for him and all of his success. He is literally my brother from another. When we met, it was just like instant family. His whole life is just this amazing thing. He went to MIT. He's this Black intellectual, and we have the most amazing conversations.
I would imagine is a lot of your relationship based on this mutual passion for directing and film?
That's part of it for sure. But it's more just like how we talk. It's just always an amazing conversation because he's just always thinking about things. So am I, and so are we, race isn't something that we think about only when George Floyd or when, a Black person is murdered, because that's happening all the time.
Right.
Being Black in America is, it's intense. It's a real thing. And to be able to have family and people and community, that's why it's so important to us, to me, to be able to know we can have these conversations.
Let's talk a bit about your work as a costume designer on Native Son on HBO, working with Ashton Sanders and deliberately thinking about how you could subvert the idea of Bigger Thomas, who in literature, of course, is such a signature character. You know how it is when you have this idea of when you're reading a book and you see that person in your head versus how you see it in real life. So there's certainly a weight into how to bring, this classic literary figure to life. And so tell me a bit about your process in ultimately deciding from the jump, okay, there's going to be a punk aesthetic. There's a bit of Jean-Michel Basquiat in there. There's a bit of just instant just subversion, bright green hair before it was a trend for many people as well.
So Rashid Johnson, who was the director of Native Son, of this modern version of Native Son, it was actually all his idea. And he reached out to me, and I remember him telling me that he wanted Bigger Thomas to be this punk kind of kid and to have green hair. And that's what made me want to come on as a costumer, because, that has been my whole thing, whether it's about costume design or styling and the importance of having Black and brown people telling our own stories. I was excited to be able to talk about this kid from the hood that didn't look typically from the hood. He was into other things, which is so the hood. We're not a monolith. We're not all into the same thing. Obviously, we're inspired by things. To be able to really draw from the punk scene, I looked to Derek Ridker. He's this English photographer, and he took pictures of everyone from Nina Cherry to RuPaul. And it's this whole punk scene, and it's very diverse, very mixed. Everyone from, Jamaican ska to punks, Boy George. And so I really was excited to be able to put Bigger Thomas in not just a motorcycle jacket with all these pins on it, but his interview suit. I was like, yeah, I really want to put him in a suit that's a little too small, but done on purpose, a vintage suit with buttons his way, how he would style an interview suit. But, props to Rashid Johnson for giving the opportunity, for creating a character like that. Because really, that's why I've always wanted to be a director, because the characters that we create are so important to how we see race. It's how we're allowed to tell the stories of Black and brown people. And if we're only allowed to tell the stories of us wearing like all black and a hoodie, then people aren't going to know that we're really creative and, that we set trends and like how dope we really are, because every time you see us, we're not that dope. We all look the same. And why I really got into costume design and film and why it's really important to me is because that's dangerous. Every time I see a hip hop film like from the 90s and the costume design is like not on point, I'm like, wait, whoa, how are you telling a story about hip hop? And the costume design isn't amazing because style was like number one.
Yeah, I feel like style is like a character at that point.
Exactly. Like most people in the music industry got their jobs because they had dope style. If you were an art director or creative in any form in the music industry and you were black and of color, they were like, oh, you have dope style, you should do this. So the fact that the movies and film and TV still hasn't caught up with that is super problematic. And that's an ultimate goal for me, is to tackle that.
You're definitely helping pave the way for sure. Beth, thank you so much for taking some time out. You've obviously worked with a lot of artists and worked across a lot of mediums. My last question is, who are some of the artists that you'd like to work with in the future that you haven't worked with yet?
Oh, wow. Like for me, art, science, technology, that's all the same. So I would love to work with an Elon Musk. That's one kind of disappointing thing with Kanye or just artists that have access. It's like they're still trying to navigate the fashion and clothing world. And I'm like, why aren't we getting into car design and architecture? And why aren't we going there? And that's, one reason why I decided to start Befi's Beauty Supply and not focus so much on the fashion. Not that there's not a fashion element to it, because there is, but also like product design, taking things like hair accessories to the next level and just simple everyday things that we need. Design is everything.
Well, yeah, there's like that L'Enchanteur golden hair roller.
Yeah, the golden hair roller. The fact that L'Enchanteur, two sisters who are very creative jewelry designers who have been making things from everyone from Erykah Badu, Mary J. Blige, Beyonce, they decided to make this hair roller. And a lot of Black people especially were very offended by it, which I was like really sad about. I'm sad that people took the time out to write bad comments about this hair roller. And there are so many other things in the world. And it's unfortunate we didn't have time to really like photograph and take pictures of, imagine this image of a Black woman with a head full of solid gold hair rollers looking like the queen that she is. We're going to do that and set the record straight. But sure. Thanks for bringing that up.
Excited for that. Thank you so much, Beth. Really appreciate you taking the time out. It was great speaking with you.
Yes, thank you for having me, Gian.
K11 Konversations is produced by Sonia Manalili and hosted by me, Gian DeLeon. Stay tuned for more episodes.